I'm Anna,
I'm Jessica.
and this is the Paranoia Pair.
I'm recording this a day late, but better late than never, I guess. I didn't want to do 2 weeks with no episode, and I already feel bad because I missed last week. But I know it's fine. It's fine. I miss weeks all the time. Just never two in a row. I can't do that. It's just like never ending, impending doom. Slap that on a t-shirt. I'm buying it. Do you guys say February or February? February. I say February. Jessica would beat my ass. Happy Valentine's Day. Sorry to break it to you, but this is a true crime podcast, so we will be talking about lots of murder. And unfortunately, none in the name of love. I was researching different real-life Atlantis cities, and I came across this submerged town beneath Lake Lanier in Georgia named Oscarville. And I thought, oh my god, I've never heard this before. This would make an interesting podcast episode. So we're all going to learn about Oscarville together. Oscarville was established in the early 1800s in Forsyth County, Georgia, and it was a rural agricultural community, and a significant portion of the residents here were African American. Many of them gained their freedom after fighting for the Union side during the Civil War. But unlike other Black communities in this kind of like reconstruction of the South, Oscarville's Black residents were actually able to own land. So they owned land and they operated farms, and they kind of achieved this economic stability here, and that was really uncommon for this era. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a lot of these Black farmers in the area often owned more land, and they were also more financially successful than some of their white neighbors. And this kind of fueled resentment and racial hostility, aside from how everyone was absolutely racist at this time anyways. In September 1906, these tensions were kind of pushed to their limits in Atlanta. On Saturday, September 22nd, 1906, Atlanta newspapers published a sensationalized report claiming that Black men had sexually assaulted several white women. And one of these reported cases were involving Ethel Lawrence and her niece Mabel Lawrence. And according to these newspapers, Mabel was visiting family in Atlanta when she and her aunt went out to pick wildflowers, and they were attacked. Mabel was hospitalized with severe injuries, and as a result, she lost an eye. These reports sparked widespread mob violence, and groups of white men and boys gathered in downtown Atlanta, and they just began attacking Black residents at random. Black neighbors were dragged from cars, they were beaten, they were stabbed, and they were shot. And a lot of this violence began in the 5 Points area. And as extra newspapers began to circulate throughout the city, the crowds grew rapidly. By midnight, it was estimated that between 10,000 and 15,000 white men were roaming the streets targeting Black residents. Trolley lines were actually shut down in an attempt to limit the mob's movement, but the violence continued nonetheless. Black men were murdered on the steps of the U.S. Post Office and inside the Marion Hotel. Decatur Street, which was the heart of Black-owned restaurants, saloons, and businesses, was devastated with mobs destroying property and assaulting anyone in sight. And by the early morning hours, the estimated death toll ranged from 25 to 30 Black victims, with countless others injured. Hospitals treated dozens of people, many of whom later died from their wounds, And on Sunday, Black residents met in the Brownsville community to discuss self defense in response to these ongoing attacks. And when Fulton County Police learned of this meeting, they decided to raid it. And during the raid, an officer was killed, which then led to a violent shootout, and 3 militia companies were deployed to Brownsville, where approximately 250 Black residents were arrested and forcibly disarmed, including professors from nearby Clark University. When asked about the violence, Atlanta's Mayor James Woodward openly blamed Black residents, stating that racial violence would continue as long as Black men allegedly assaulted white women. So we're just going to blame an entire race rather than addressing the, mob violence or false accusations in true old white men fashion. We're just going straight to racism. The aftermath of this massacre devastated Atlanta's Black economy, and Black-owned businesses were destroyed, families were displaced, and many businesses relocated to predominantly Black neighborhoods where they felt like they had more safety and community support. And even though the violence kind of died down in Atlanta eventually, the racial hostility in northern Georgia did not disappear. Forsyth County resentment toward Black landowners continued to grow, especially among struggling white farmers who blamed their economic hardships on the Black landowners that they were renting land from. On September 5th, 1912, a 22-year-old white woman named Ellen Grice claimed 2 Black men had attempted to rape her. She claims to have found a Black man in her bedroom after waking up. 5 Black men were arrested by the Forsyth County Sheriff in connection with this accusation. When news spread that 5 Black men had been arrested in connection, a local Black preacher named Grant Smith spoke out in their defense, and he argued that there was no solid evidence to justify holding all 5 men. He suggested that Ellen may have been protecting a consensual relationship rather than describing an assault. And this is kind of a normal thing that would happen in the South. White women were either caught being in a relationship with a Black man, or they had this fear of people finding out that they were in a relationship with a Black man, and they would just claim that they were raped, because in their minds it was better to claim that you were raped by a Black man than to admit that you were in an interracial relationship. Preacher Grant Smith's claims outraged a lot of white residents in Cumming, which was a neighboring town, and a mob of white men decided they were going to surround him on the courthouse steps and literally beat the shit out of him. Some of them even used whips, and this was kind of an attempt to stop him from speaking out and to punish him for introducing this alternative narrative. Law enforcement officers eventually intervened, and they did take Grant Smith inside the courthouse for his safety, but the attack had left him with life-threatening injuries. Luckily, he did survive, and he was later protected by authorities who kept him from further mob violence by sheltering him and transferring him out of town. But no one was ever arrested or held accountable for his brutal beating, because of course not. Around the same time, a separate incident involving another young white woman named May Crow added to this white anger and contributed to the attacks against this county's Black residents. May Crow was allegedly assaulted and left severely injured. She had been raped and bludgeoned in the head with a rock, and she was left behind with a fractured skull and was hidden in a pile of leaves. Black men, of course, were immediately blamed, and the community demanded retaliation rather than a thorough investigation. Searchers at the scene where May Crow's body was found had reported discovering a small pocket mirror, and it was allegedly the pocket mirror of Ernest Knox, a local Black 16-year-old who lived in Cumming. Ernest was subjected to extreme pressure and intimidation, given the events I think anyone would expect. So, facing the very real threat of a public lynching, he was coerced into signing a confession. And historians actually widely agree that this confession was not freely given and was instead extracted under duress, which was a common practice in the Jim Crow South when black men were accused of crimes against white women. And his confession was treated basically as confirmation of guilt and was used to justify escalating violence, even though there was no reliable evidence to prove that he did this crime. After Ernest was arrested, the police did not stop because they arrested 4 more black residents as supposed accomplices, and this included Rob Edwards, who was also known as Big Rob, and he was a well-known Oscarville resident. And before any trial could happen, a mob of about 2,000 white vigilantes gathered outside the courthouse, and they broke in. They broke in and dragged Rob Edwards from his cell and beat him. Then they shot him, and then they lynched him, and his body was taken to the town square and hung from a telephone pole, where people gathered to watch and fired even more shots into his body. Into his dead body. And it only got worse from there because Oscar Daniel and Ernest Knox, both teenagers, were rushed through separate trials that lasted just one entire day. That's it. Just one day. Despite the serious legal issues and no due process, both were found guilty and sentenced to death. And their executions, which were illegal under state law at the time, were carried out anyway and turned into public spectacles. And this drew in crowds of thousands of people. So again, what happened here wasn't justice. It was about sending a message, and that message continued to help drive an entire black community out of Oscarville. Riots started happening the night of May Crow's funeral by a group of white men called Night Riders. And they rode horses and went into black neighborhoods at night, so they were less likely to be spotted. Many of the night ridings involved arson, including a local church in Oscarville, and these attacks happened regularly for several months. Many residents of Oscarville died in these attacks while fleeing to safety in Gainesville, and within a few years, 98% of black residents in Oscarville had either left Forsyth County or had been killed for refusing to leave. Those who were able to flee went to Hall County, where they greatly increased the poultry production there. And what happened in Forsyth County wasn't uncommon at all. As you can imagine, white communities would attempt to forcibly remove all black residents from their communities. But unlike Forsyth County, similar attempts in Hall County led to arrests within the first week, which caused this movement to really die out. And by the 1940s, decades after Forsyth County had been forcibly cleared of the black population, the federal government announced plans to build Buford Dam as part of a large flood control and power generating project. The dam would be constructed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and once completed, it would flood thousands of acres of land to create what we now know as Lake Lanier. And to make this happen, the government began buying out and, in many cases, seizing private property through eminent domain. Entire towns, farms, and cemeteries sat in the path of this planned reservoir, and Oscarville was included in this buyout. Families were paid minimal compensation for their land, and graves were supposed to be relocated, but in reality, many cemeteries were moved quickly, improperly, or just not at all. Some remains were left behind, and others were relocated without proper records. And when this area was flooded in the 1950s, whatever was left, whether it was homes, foundations, roads, and graves, disappeared into the water. So there's literally a ghost town in Lake Lanier. By 1956, Lake Lanier officially opened, and it now became a place known for boating, vacation homes, and summer tourism. Lake Lanier also is known for being supposedly haunted. People talk about unexplained drownings and bad energy and how the lake just feels off. And based on the history, yeah, I believe it. That's the history of Lake Lanier, guys. Okay, well,
Thanks for listening.
if you enjoyed this episode, you can find us on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and Facebook at Paranoia Pair Pod. And we will see you next Friday.
Stay spooky.